What would you do if you found a letter from someone you've known for years, but the words inside revealed a truth so powerful it brought you to tears? Aidan Westbrook was a self-made millionaire. His wealth and success were the talk of the town, but the man behind the name remained a mystery to most. His grand estate, with its marble floors and towering windows, was an imposing sight, standing far above the modest homes in the neighborhood. Yet, despite the luxury that surrounded him, Aidan's life felt hollow. He had built an empire, but the price was steep. His family, once the center of his world, had disappeared, leaving behind an aching void. The mansion, while filled with things art, antiques, fine furniture, lacked the one thing Aidan truly craved: warmth. Aidan was used to solitude, finding comfort in his work, but deep down, he felt the weight of loneliness pressing down on him every day. No one truly knew him, not his colleagues, not his distant relatives, and certainly not the staff who worked in his home. He kept them at arm's length, remaining as distant and cold as the walls of his mansion. But little did he know that the arrival of a new maid would begin to unravel everything. Elena Pierce, a single mother, had just moved to the city in search of better opportunities. She had an 8-year-old daughter, Lily, and her goal was simple: to give her daughter a life filled with possibilities she never had. Elena worked multiple jobs just to make ends meet, scraping by and pushing forward with a determination fueled by love for her daughter. When a job offer came through to work as a maid for Aidan Westbrook, she saw it as an opportunity to ease her financial struggles. She was nervous this job would bring her into the world of the ultra-wealthy, a world so foreign to her, but she knew she had to do whatever it took to secure a future for Lily. On her first day at Aidan's mansion, Elena was struck by the sheer contrast between her own life and the luxury she saw around her. The house was enormous, with high ceilings and intricate chandeliers that sparkled in the light. The staff was few but efficient, and Elena, still new to the estate, was keen to learn the ins and outs of her new role. Yet, despite the beauty of the surroundings, Elena couldn't help but feel a sense of isolation. It was as though she had entered a world where she didn't belong, a world where the rich were untouched by the same struggles she faced every day. As Elena began to settle into her new job, she noticed something unusual. Aidan Westbrook, despite being a wealthy and influential figure, never seemed to leave his office. He kept to himself, rarely engaging with anyone, and his few interactions with the staff were brief and cold. The mansion was silent, save for the occasional footsteps of staff members going about their work. Elena quickly became accustomed to the stillness, but it was an eerie kind of silence, one that echoed the loneliness Aidan seemed to carry. But one afternoon, as Elena was dusting off a bookshelf in one of the many grand rooms of the mansion, something caught her eye. It was a letter, hidden behind a stack of papers on the desk. The envelope was old, the paper yellowed with age. Curiosity gnawed at Elena, but she hesitated. Should she open it? It didn't belong to her after all. But something about the letter felt different, and a part of her couldn't resist. As she slowly opened the envelope, she discovered a carefully written letter addressed to Aidan. The words inside were simple, yet powerful, a message from someone in his past, someone Aidan had long since shut out. The letter spoke of love, loss, and regret, a reminder of a time when Aidan wasn't just a millionaire but a man with a family who meant the world to him. Elena's heart clenched as she read the words, realizing that this letter held the key to a part of Aidan's past he had kept hidden for so long. Elena spent the next few days lost in thought, the letter weighing heavily on her mind. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Aidan's story than met the eye. The mansion, once just a place where she worked, had transformed into something far more meaningful. It was no longer just an imposing house, it was a monument to a man who had suffered immense loss. Elena couldn't help but wonder, what had happened to the family that Aidan had loved so much? Why had they disappeared? And why, after all these years, had someone taken the time to write him such a heartfelt letter? Despite her desire to know more, Elena couldn't bring herself to confront Aidan. He was a man of few words, and she, as his employee, felt it would be inappropriate to pry into his private life. But something inside her told her that the truth was too important to ignore. She couldn't let the past remain buried, not when it had the potential to change Aidan's life and her own forever. And so, Elena made a decision. She would quietly observe, learn more about Aidan, and see if the truth would eventually come to light. Little did she know, the path she had chosen would lead her into a deeply emotional journey that neither of them had ever anticipated. Days passed, and Elena's curiosity about Aidan deepened. She had seen glimpses of his vulnerable side, his quiet demeanor, his reluctance to interact with anybody. It was all wrapped in layers of cold indifference. However, something about the letter, the emotions it stirred, made her wonder if there was a chance to break through those walls. Elena began paying closer attention to the small details in Aidan's behavior. She noticed the framed photo on his desk, a picture of a woman and a child, both smiling. Aidan's gaze often lingered on it, his face softening for just a moment before the familiar hardness returned. One day, while cleaning the living room, Elena's young daughter Lily came to visit the mansion. She had always been curious about where her mother worked and insisted on coming with her that day. Elena didn't mind. Lily's sweet, innocent nature always brought a sense of warmth to the sterile atmosphere of the mansion. As they wandered through the house, Lily's eyes were drawn to a toy in the corner of one of the guest rooms. It was a plush bear, worn but loved, sitting atop a bookshelf. Lily's curiosity got the better of her, and as Elena tried to redirect her, they stumbled upon Aidan himself. For the first time, Elena saw him interact with someone other than the staff. Aidan's face softened when he saw Lily, and he knelt down, offering her the bear. Elena watched, taken aback. Aidan's stern expression melted as he exchanged a few words with her, something that resembled a smile touching his lips. This was the first sign that there might be more to this man than the distant millionaire who barely spoke to anyone. The encounter with Lily left Elena with more questions than answers. What was it about children that seemed to soften Aidan's heart? She couldn't help but wonder if the photo on his desk, the one of the smiling woman and child, was connected to the pain she suspected he was hiding. But there was little time for her to dwell on this curiosity, as work at the mansion kept her busy. However, Elena couldn't help but notice that Aidan's routine seemed to be shifting. He began spending more time in the mansion's vast library, occasionally asking Elena to fetch books for him. One evening, as she entered the library to deliver a stack of books, Elena found Aidan sitting at a large wooden desk, writing something in a notebook. His face was contorted in concentration, but there was a sadness behind his eyes. Elena hesitated for a moment, unsure of whether to disturb him, but then she remembered the letter she had found. She cleared her throat gently, and Aidan looked up. The brief exchange of glances was enough for her to understand that something was wrong. He didn't speak at first, but then Aidan sighed and set his pen down. "I am sorry," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean to startle you." Elena nodded but remained silent, not knowing what to say. It was clear that Aidan was carrying a burden, but what was it? She wanted to ask, but the weight of the moment kept her from speaking. Instead, they stood in silence for a while, with only the sound of a distant clock ticking in the background. In the weeks that followed, Elena became increasingly aware of Aidan's internal struggle. She had seen him in moments of rare vulnerability, and each time she was left wondering just how deep his pain ran. One night, as she cleaned his office, she found herself staring at the letter she had hidden away. The words still haunted her, and she couldn't shake the feeling that they were somehow tied to the events unfolding around her. Aidan, in his silence, was telling her his story in pieces, and she couldn't help but feel that the truth was on the verge of being revealed. As Elena grew more curious about Aidan's past, she found herself spending more time observing him in silence. She watched how he interacted with the few people who came into his life: his personal assistant, his lawyer, and Miss Grace, an elderly friend who frequently visited. Miss Grace, with her kind eyes and soft voice, had a gentle way of speaking to Aidan that seemed to get through to him when others couldn't. Elena had heard Miss Grace speak of Aidan's late wife and child on a few occasions, always in a tone that mixed both fondness and sadness. It was clear that Aidan had loved them deeply, but Elena still couldn't understand what had happened to them, why they were no longer part of his life. One evening, while working late, Elena was startled by the sound of a crash coming from one of the rooms. Rushing to see what had happened, she found Aidan standing over a broken vase, looking like he was about to collapse. His hand trembled as he picked up the pieces of shattered glass, but he seemed to lack the strength to do it. Elena immediately knelt beside him, instinctively trying to help. Aidan's eyes met hers, and for the first time, Elena saw the depth of his sorrow. It was as if the years of hidden grief had finally broken through. Elena gently helped him gather the pieces, but her heart ached for him. What was it that hurt him so much? Why did he push everyone away? And why, despite everything, was he so reluctant to let anyone in? The following days were quieter, but a shift was noticeable. Aidan's demeanor had softened just slightly, and he began to open up, albeit reluctantly. One evening, as Elena was preparing dinner for him, Aidan appeared in the kitchen, looking more vulnerable than she had ever seen him before. His gaze fell on her, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Aidan broke the silence. "Do you ever think about the past?" he asked, his voice low, almost as if he were speaking to himself. Elena paused for a moment, her hand still on the stove, unsure of how to respond. She had her own past to consider, her struggles as a single mother, her dreams for Lily, and the pain she carried from her own losses. But she knew this wasn't the time to reflect on her own life. Aidan had asked a question that seemed to echo a deep need within him. "I do," Elena finally replied, her voice soft. "Sometimes it's hard to move forward when the past feels so heavy." Aidan's expression faltered for a moment, and then he nodded, as if the words held some kind of weight for him. "Yeah, it is," he said almost to himself. "I lost everything once. My wife, my son. I never thought I'd be the same after that." Elena's heart skipped a beat. In that single moment, Aidan had let down his guard, revealing the raw pain he had been hiding. But before she could say anything more, he quickly turned away, retreating back into the solitude he had built around himself for years. Elena watched him leave, feeling a mix of sadness and hope. It was a small breakthrough, but it was a breakthrough nonetheless. The days that followed were filled with an uneasy tension. Aidan, though more open than he had ever been, still maintained a distance that kept Elena at arm's length. But it was clear that something had shifted in him, something that Elena couldn't quite put her finger on. Her curiosity grew, but so did her understanding of Aidan's grief. She had seen glimpses of the man he used to be, the man who once had a family, the man who had loved and lost. She couldn't help but wonder if she had been the one to bring him out of the shadows, even just a little. But that night, everything would change. It began as a simple evening. Elena had just finished tidying up the kitchen when she heard a faint cry in the distance. It was soft at first, but then louder. Elena rushed out into the hallway, her heart racing. It was Aidan. She found him standing near the front door, his face pale and his eyes wide with fear. He looked like a man who had seen a ghost. "Aidan?" Elena asked, her voice trembling. "What's wrong?" Aidan didn't answer at first. He was staring at something in the distance, his eyes locked onto a point beyond the front gates of the mansion. Elena followed his gaze and saw nothing. But then, just as quickly as the moment had started, Aidan collapsed to his knees, tears streaming down his face. Elena rushed to his side, her hands instinctively reaching out to support him. The moment was intense, a mix of grief and confusion, and Elena's mind raced. What had caused this sudden outburst of emotion? Was it the letter? Was it something deeper? Aidan, in that moment, seemed lost, completely overwhelmed by his own sorrow. Elena knew she had to help him, but the more she tried to comfort him, the more she realized that this was a turning point for both of them, a point where the truth, long buried, was about to be unveiled. As Elena held Aidan, his sobs grew louder, but there was something cathartic about them. It was as if the floodgates had finally opened, and all the pain he had locked away for so long was being released in a single, heartbreaking moment. For the first time, Aidan allowed himself to break down completely. Elena, though shocked and unsure, stayed by his side, offering him the support he had never asked for. Through his tears, Aidan finally spoke. "I lost them. Both of them. I don't even know what happened. My wife. She was everything to me. And my son. He was my world." Elena's heart tightened. She had known, deep down, that Aidan had experienced unimaginable loss, but hearing him speak those words brought it all into focus. This wasn't just about a wealthy man hiding behind his money. This was a man who had loved deeply, a man who had lost the two people who meant the most to him. Elena listened, not knowing what to say, but feeling an overwhelming urge to reach out and help him heal. But Aidan wasn't done yet. "I pushed them away," he continued, his voice hoarse. "I pushed my wife away because I was so focused on work. And then, my son." He choked on the words, unable to continue. Elena, sensing the depth of his pain, placed a hand on his shoulder, silently offering him the comfort he so desperately needed. The truth, though painful, had finally come out. And in that moment, Elena understood that Aidan's isolation had been a form of self-punishment, a way of dealing with the guilt he had carried for years. But this moment, this raw exchange of vulnerability, was the beginning of his healing. And for Elena, it was a turning point as well. She realized that the man she had come to care for was not just a distant millionaire, but someone who had endured unimaginable pain. Aidan's words hung in the air like a heavy fog, and Elena could feel the weight of his grief pressing down on them both. He wasn't finished yet, though. Slowly, as if the words were tearing at him, Aidan continued. "The night they died, I was supposed to be there. I told myself work was more important. I told myself there would always be another opportunity, another moment, but there wasn't. I was too late. My wife and son, they didn't make it." Elena's heart broke for him. She couldn't even begin to imagine the torment he had been through, the regret that had eaten away at him for all these years. It was a pain that she could feel in the very air around them. He had built a fortress around himself, not out of wealth, but out of guilt, and now that fortress was crumbling. "I didn't know how to forgive myself," Aidan whispered, his voice trembling, "and I didn't know how to let anyone else in. But maybe it's too late for that. Maybe here is no way back." His eyes were hollow, a reflection of the despair he had been living with for so long. Elena, though still unsure of the full extent of his pain, knew in her heart that Aidan had been living in darkness for far too long. She had been a light for him, a beacon of warmth and kindness in a place that had once been cold and empty. She took a deep breath and said the words she had been too afraid to speak before. "It's never too late to change, Aidan," Elena said softly, her voice full of compassion. "You've been through so much, but you don't have to carry this burden alone anymore. You don't have to be this person." Aidan's gaze met hers, and for the first time, Elena saw a flicker of hope behind his eyes. The walls that had surrounded him for so long were starting to crumble, and the man beneath the mask was beginning to emerge. It wasn't going to be easy, and the road to healing would be long, but in that moment, Elena knew that she had unlocked something within him. As Elena and Aidan sat together in the mansion's grand hall, a profound silence enveloped them. It was as if the entire house had been holding its breath, waiting for this moment of reckoning. For the first time, Elena saw Aidan as a man, not a wealthy businessman, but a man who had loved deeply and had suffered immense loss. And in that silence, Elena knew that the true healing could now begin. Aidan didn't speak for a while, but he didn't need to. He had been holding on to his grief for so long, and now, with Elena by his side, he was slowly starting to let go. She could see the transformation in his eyes. A man who had once been consumed by guilt and isolation was beginning to find the strength to face his past. It wasn't long before Aidan took a step toward Elena, his voice now steady, though filled with emotion. "Thank you, Elena," he said quietly. "You've helped me see something I didn't know I could find. I thought I was beyond saving, but maybe I am not." Elena smiled softly, a sense of peace settling within her. "You are not alone, Aidan," she said gently. Here is always hope. You just need to be willing to embrace it." And in that moment, something shifted between them. It wasn't just the beginning of Aidan's healing, but the beginning of a deeper connection between him and Elena. Their bond, forged in the crucible of his pain, was now something new, a connection built on understanding, compassion, and the shared belief that healing, though difficult, was possible. As the days passed, the mansion, once cold and lifeless, began to feel different. There was a new warmth in the air, a quiet sense of hope. Aidan was no longer the distant, aloof millionaire who spent his days in isolation. With Elena's support, he began to open up, allowing himself to feel again, to connect. He no longer pushed people away. Instead, he sought out moments of comfort, whether it was sitting down to dinner with Elena or listening to the sounds of laughter as she spent time with her daughter, Lily. The mansion, too, began to feel like a home again. Elena, for her part, had also experienced a shift. She had started to see Aidan not just as the wealthy man who hired her to clean his mansion, but as someone with depth, with real emotions. Their bond grew, and she found herself opening up to him in ways she hadn't expected. She shared stories about her struggles as a single mother, her dreams for Lily, and the pain she had carried since the loss of her own family members. In doing so, she realized that Aidan, in many ways, was no different from her. He had loved and lost, and the scars left behind were deep, but they were scars they could both learn to heal from together. One evening, as they sat in the living room with a glass of wine, Aidan turned to Elena and spoke with quiet sincerity. "I want to make things right. I want to help people, to make up for the years I spent wallowing in my grief. I don't want my past to define me anymore." Elena's heart swelled with pride for him, for the man he was becoming. She knew it wasn't going to be easy, but this was the first real step toward his redemption. The changes in Aidan were not limited to the walls of the mansion. He began to reach out to those he had once ignored or dismissed. His lawyer, Mr. Bennett, who had always seen Aidan as a cold, business-minded man, noticed the shift in his demeanor. One day, when they were meeting to discuss a charity project Aidan had been quietly supporting, Mr. Bennett couldn't help but comment on the transformation he'd witnessed. "You are a different man, Aidan," Mr. Bennett said, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "I've seen you go from this distant figure to someone who actually cares. Whatever you are doing, keep it up. The world needs more people like you." Aidan nodded, a small but genuine smile forming on his lips. "It's not easy, but I am trying. I've spent so many years shutting people out, thinking that I could heal on my own, but I've learned that you can't do it alone. Sometimes, the people you least expect are the ones who help you find your way." And Elena was one of those people. She had come into his life when he least expected it, and now, with her help, Aidan had found the courage to look beyond his pain and toward a future that was filled with possibility. His connection to Elena, as well as to Lily, had opened his eyes to the things that truly mattered: love, connection, and the ability to forgive oneself. Elena, too, had found a new sense of purpose. She realized that she wasn't just helping Aidan, she was helping herself, too. The act of caring for someone else, of seeing the humanity in him, helped her to heal from her own wounds. It wasn't just about Aidan's redemption, it was about her own as well. As the weeks turned into months, Aidan's life continued to evolve. The mansion was no longer a cold, lonely place. It had become a sanctuary for growth, a place where healing took place, both for Aidan and for Elena. Aidan's decision to step out of the shadows of his past was paying off in ways he never expected. Not only was he reconnecting with those he had pushed away, but he was also using his resources to make a difference in the world. He had started funding education programs for underprivileged children, giving them opportunities they would otherwise never have had. His foundation grew, and Aidan found himself more invested in it than he had ever been in any business venture. Elena had become more than just a maid to him. She was now a close confidant and an ally. They had developed a deep bond, built on trust and mutual respect. Aidan had invited her to work alongside him in the foundation, helping him choose which causes to support. Together, they made a powerful team, one that balanced Aidan's financial acumen with Elena's heartfelt understanding of the human condition. They also began to plan for the future, a future where their pasts were no longer chains that held them back, but stories that had shaped them into the people they were becoming. One afternoon, as they sat together in the sunroom, Elena's phone buzzed. It was a message from her daughter, Lily. The message was simple, yet profound. "I am proud of you, Mom." Elena smiled and showed Aidan the message, and for the first time, she felt truly proud of herself too. She had come a long way from the woman who had walked into that mansion with little more than a broken heart and a desire to provide for her daughter. Now, she had purpose. She had a sense of belonging, and, maybe most importantly, she had someone who truly saw her for who she was. As the sun began to set that evening, casting a warm golden glow over the mansion, Aidan stood by the window watching the horizon. He had come so far since the day he first met Elena. His life was no longer defined by the scars of his past, and he no longer felt like the man who had lost everything. In fact, he had gained so much more than he had ever expected. friendship, love, and a second chance at life. Elena had been the catalyst for his transformation, the person who had reminded him that life, though painful, was worth living and worth living fully. Elena joined him by the window, her presence a comfort he had grown to rely on. "Do you ever wonder how things would have turned out if we hadn't met?" Aidan asked quietly. Elena smiled, her eyes meeting his. "I think we were always meant to meet," she said softly. "Sometimes, life has a funny way of bringing people together when they need it most." Aidan nodded, his heart full of gratitude for everything that had changed. "I don't think I could have made it through without you, Elena. You've been my rock, and I'll never forget what you've done for me." Elena, her eyes shining with warmth, placed a hand on his arm. "You did the hard work, Aidan. You found the courage to face your past and heal. I am just glad I could be there with you." As they stood there together, the world outside seemed to stand still for a moment. It was as though time had slowed down, allowing them to savor the peace that had settled over their lives. They had both been through so much, but in that quiet moment, they understood that they were no longer defined by their pasts. They had created something new, something beautiful,